Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Environment and Energy Committee of the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus. We're really glad you could join us. My name is Edith Macra. I am the Director of Environmental Initiatives for the Mayor's Caucus, and filling in for Mayor Kevin Burns, who is sent his regrets and unable to join us for today. We have both a delightful topic, monarch butterflies, and then some opportunities for actions that are very timely. So that's the reason for the monarch conversation. Again, just to get started, and if you're just joining us, please go ahead and put the name of the community that you represent or organization that you represent in the chat, so we have an opportunity to know who's in the room, and we're thrilled to have a really good turnout for today's meeting. We will have some poll questions, but mostly have a really good lineup of speakers for you, and we are hoping for some engagement. Hi, Mayor Booker. Nice to see you here as well. And apologies if I don't welcome everyone. As you know, on Zoom, you're always you're juggling with screens and views and things. But today we're going to be talking about the monarch butterfly, which is arguably our most beloved and familiar wildlife species in the Chicago metro region. Every year, this little tiny delicate animal migrates across eastern U.S., goes to southern Mexico ultimately, and then back, does that over generations, which we'll hear about. Then Illinois is a very critical throughway for monarch migration. And over the decades, changes in the way we manage land, agricultural practices have eliminated butterfly habitat corridors or changed the character of those corridors, most notably the elimination or a severe reduction in the population of the milkweed plant, which is really vital to the monarch's life cycle. Since 1980, we've seen the eastern monarch population decline by more than 80%. And there's been a whole host of really creative, innovative, and effective monarch conservation programs that have been working with land managers at multiple scales, from local urban environments, which we'll be hearing about, to very large-scale habitats, and then internationally as well, to try to reverse this decline. And we'll hear from Dan Salas about these conservation efforts and programs. Yet we're still losing monarch population. And this has been, under watch for a number of years now, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife is now proposing protection for the monarch butterfly under the Endangered Species Act. And we have Sean Serton from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to explain that process to us. But first, we'll start with the science. And so I'm very pleased to introduce Astor Hassel, who is the lead conservation ecologist at the Keller Science Action Center of the Field Museum. Astor has been with the Field Museum for nearly 15 years. Astor has a master's in terrestrial ecosystems from University of Michigan and a BS in biology from Roger Williams University. Astor has promised to help us understand where we are now, how we got here, and what needs to be done now. Astor, welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to share this chilly day with you. And hopefully we can talk about some of the warmer season when monarchs are with us. And let's see, I'm sharing the correct slide, right?
Yes, you've got the cover slide.
Yeah, I'm in that phase now where I can't see at all what I'm sharing with you. So with that, a little bit about where I'm going to take us. Let me do that so that things move. Okay, so I am going to give you a little bit of the background, the monarch biology. Sometimes this is things we all already know, but I'll go a little bit quickly through it, but that way we'll all be on the same page. I'm going to give you the status. We've talked about how monarchs are in trouble, but how do we know that? Why are we worried about monarch butterflies? And then the specific things that I've worked on are why are cities important? Why are urban places is important? And what can we do? How do we fit into this story? Because sometimes urban places aren't thought of as part of the solution for conservation. Often we're cast as the main problem. And that's certainly not the case for monarch butterflies. And then I'll hand it off to everyone else. So beep, why are we beeping, computer? Okay, so I am from the Field Museum. Most folks on this call are probably familiar with us, but many people think of us for our very good dinosaurs and mummies. We do have a conservation division that's been around since 1995. We've worked on monarch issues since 2015, 2016. I like this picture because it shows our native pollinator garden shortly after it was planted. It's one of my favorite pictures of the museum. And boy, those don't like to work. So when I talk about monarch butterflies, usually one of the things that people know about them is that they migrate. Something that's important for this story today is that monarch butterflies in across the United States are proposed for listing. There are two populations, the western population, the eastern population, creative names. They're divided by the Rocky Mountains. And we're mostly going to be talking about the eastern population because that's where we are. There is a western population. They broadly winter on the coast and summer inland. They're doing much worse than the eastern population, but we're going to focus on the eastern population. The eastern population monarchs are the ones that we see in the summer in our communities. And right now, in January, they are in central Mexico around Michoacan in state of Mexico. They migrated there in one big hop. The ones you saw in late August in and around, those individuals flew all the way to central Mexico. Uh, and then they will begin the journey back, breed, die, and their offspring will be the ones that you see, hopefully, in the summer. There is also a small non-migratory population of monarch butterflies in southern Florida, and we're not going to talk about them at all. So, what I want you to take away from this map is that there are monarchs all across the east of the Rocky Mountains, and that the Midwest, we are the breadbasket for monarch butterflies because that journey south and that overwintering on the trees, not everyone survives the journey. That is a dangerous path. That's a long way for something that weighs less than the dime that might be in your pocket. And overwintering on those trees, it's cool. It's a good evolutionary strategy, but not everyone makes it. And so it's really important for those butterflies that make it back to us for us to exponentially increase that population. Another way to look at this, because everyone's visually different, is you put it into a circle. Here in orange is kind of when we have monarchs. Canonically, we June 1st is when we first get monarch butterflies. That's very weather dependent. Late May is like edge case. We've had some very cool springs lately, such that we're not seeing monarchs until quite a bit later in June. Um, but it's that second, third, and fourth generation. And so we need as many butterflies to survive from the second generation so that the third generation gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So the largest number in that fourth generation are going to live longer than the preceding three generations and fly to a place that they've never been, that their parents have never been, that their grandparents have never been, somehow find that place, overwinter, and then come back, which is very cool. Um, and so it's about February that they start making the journey back. What, like I said, weather is very important. And I also want to highlight, and then the second thing that people typically know about monarch butterflies, or may know, is that they have a really important relationship with milkweed. And I've chosen this image because it's I think a pretty urban image of monarch butterflies. It's monarch butterflies on a type of milkweed that's so common, we've called it common milkweed. It's a type of milkweed that's so common that when I show it to people, people often go, "Oh, it's that thing I see in the middle of the highway." Um, we are somewhat fortunate here in the Midwest that we have a milkweed that is so common that it truly lives up to the weed part of its name. Out west, milkweed can be quite difficult to grow. Not so here. Sometimes we have the opposite problem where we're like, please stop growing. I planted you, but I didn't want quite so much of you in this place. So milkweed has monarchs have a host plant relationship with milkweed. And this is somewhat common in insects that they have a specific relationship with a specific kind of plant or a group of plants. In milkweed, or in monarch's case, it's everything in the genus Asclepias. There are multiple different kinds of milkweed. I argue that there's a kind of milkweed for whatever situation you have. Although later in my talk, we'll learn that common milkweed has many good properties for monarchs, but there are also great other milkweeds, and you should do the one that works best. Now, it is true that female monarchs will only lay eggs on milkweed. They can actually taste it through their feet. And monarch caterpillars will only eat milkweed. The adults, the butterfly form, they don't eat milkweed. They drink nectar from flowers like most other pollinators. So you could have the world's largest, you could fill Soldier Field with milkweed and not sustain the monarch butterfly population because the adults need blooming flowers throughout the growing season, and milkweed only grows for a short part of that. Similarly, you could have the most diverse, beautiful, amazing prairie, all of Medewan National Tallgrass Prairie, and not sustain the monarch butterfly population if it didn't also contain milkweed. So you need a diverse prairie or, garden, prairie garden to support monarch butterflies, which is great news for other pollinators. And I'm a big fan of all the pollinators because monarchs aren't the only ones in trouble. Secret story, monarchs are in trouble, but so are most of the other pollinators. So we need to have diverse pollinator gardens, and that's great because also just planting monoculture milkweed, it wouldn't be that beautiful or fun. So what does that look like? Here's just a couple of images from projects that we've done, pictures that people have sent us to show that these can fit anywhere in your life. This Claire Buckley's image from her balcony, I love because when we started this a number of years ago, people said that you couldn't have milkweed in pots. You couldn't have pollinator gardens on your balcony. And we didn't actually know if that was true in 2015, 2016. Claire got eggs and caterpillars on that swamp milkweed plant on her balcony. It's not like the easiest way to do it, but it does work. So everyone who has outdoor space with sunlight can participate. You can also convert a suburban lawn, and it can look great in that other image's place. So there are opportunities to fit in lots of different urban settings. Why does my phone computer? The last thing, and the thing that's brought us here together, is that a lot of people know that monarchs are in trouble. That trouble looks like the population is declining. The population for the eastern monarchs gets measured in the winter when they're overwintering in Mexico. This graph is in hectares of monarchs, so it's the area that they occupy, which is a weird way to measure population, except that it's still a lot of butterflies. I mean, in some ways, this is a hard thing to communicate, that you're to communicate to people, oh, something is potentially an endangered species, but I saw one last summer. It's true. But there used to be just rivers, and you couldn't not see monarch butterflies. Even in the years that I've been doing this, years that I've been living in the Midwest, it's gone from I would see monarchs they were like ubiquitous. I wouldn't even think about them to I have people calling me and saying, it's a problem. I didn't see a monarch in June. And this graph reflects that. There is a line at 6 because good science from the Fish and Wildlife Service says that we need to average 6 hectares of monarchs, which is about 15 acres of monarchs overwintering to sustain the population. That's average, not attain it once in 2018, 2019, as we did. So we're not nearly there. And that and a lot of other science that involves population modeling that I could do a 1 hour talk on, is what has led to this listing process that is going on. So what I want to say a little bit about what happens in Mexico, because I'm going to talk a lot about what we do here in the Midwest to sustain the population, and it wouldn't be fair and it wouldn't be possible to sustain the population without acknowledging that a lot happens at the overwintering site. So that is where the population gets measured. The monarchs hang from these oyamel trees. The center image there, where the trees look like they're maybe dying or covered in rust, that's butterflies hanging from them. There's a sanctuary where you can go visit. I hear it's really cool. There is lots of money both coming from within Mexico state money, but nonprofit money, money outside of Mexico to sustain the population. There's volunteer work that's done. Not to say that there aren't problems. There's logging, both legal and illegal. Not all of the overwintering sites are protected. And there's just weather. It's butterflies hanging from a tree. It's all about them being at the right elevational gradient. Sometimes there are storms and butterflies die. It's not a perfect system. There are certainly concerns with climate change about the long-term sustainability of the overwintering site. None of this is perfect. But there is work that happens both in Mexico and Canada. This isn't just us on our own trying to sustain these monarchs. And as I mentioned, what's happening with monarchs isn't happening alone. There have been a number of both papers and entire journal articles that massive loss of insect populations across all the different insect taxa. Bees are the other one you may hear a lot about, is happening across the world. And it's not just a unique thing that's happening to monarch butterflies. Monarchs are something where we have good population data. There is another bumblebee that is federally listed that occurs here in the Chicago area called the rusty patch bumblebee, that was observed at the Ravenswood or Rogers Park, I think, Metro stop, which is pretty cool, like just on the embankment. So it's right here in the urban landscape. But the things that we would do to sustain monarchs are a good umbrella for things that would also be good for sustaining other pollinator populations. One way that to think about it it's been described to me is if you think about taking a road trip in the summer and you used to stop and clean your windshield from bugs, you don't do that as much as you used to. In fact, I don't think I do anymore. Or if you're old enough that you were a kid and you used to play out on the street until the street lights came on and there were all these moths buzzing around it, if you go and look, not now because it's too cold, but in the summer, boy, there's a lot less. You can see the decline. You don't have to have a population study. So back to monarchs, that same work that says we need to sustain about 6 hectares said in order to do that, we need to add probably more than 1.3 billion stems of milkweed to the landscape. Where are we going to put them? This is next to an image of conventional agriculture because that milkweed used to be in amongst the agricultural landscape. It grew in amongst the corn and beans and other things. And the ability to have more monoculture agriculture to remove milkweed because it was a problem for farmers. It's got this really sticky sap when they would hit it with the combine during harvesting, it really messed things up. It was removed from the in amongst the crops and it's not going back in there. Maybe it will exist around crop edges, but it's not going back in the middle. Where are we going to put it? Is what I made this slide to say. I preempted the slide. Well, I would argue that there is a lot of opportunity amongst the cities in the Eastern population. Um, People who don't think a lot about cities, which are not the people on this call, but sometimes I give this talk to people who aren't city people, think, oh, there's not a lot of space in cities, but we know that that's not the case. Um, and we also know that cities need nature. We build our cities in beautiful places and we put into them beautiful landscapes. Within the field of ecology, there's been this long question of does nature need cities? Often we're posed as like the problem. The thing that's ruining nature is the urban landscape. And we know that that's not the case. Again, sometimes I have to convince people of that. Oh, so one of the problems for that is the data that we have. So very urban Chicago here, Field Museum where I work when I'm not too cold to go there. Some of the data we have is really coarse. And so this is just the urbanization of the South Loop of Chicago. And if you look at that, it's like, well, of course you can't put any nature in there. It's just all, I don't know, urban red bad. But with higher resolution data, we can look in and say, wow, Like there is a lot of trees and green space within that highly, highly urban part of Chicago. Um, we blocked out the center of Soldier Field and decided we weren't going to be able to put milkweed in the center of Soldier Field. I think people like to play sports there. Um, and so if you extrapolate this across, and this is the Cook and the Collier counties, where are those opportunities of open space? And this is looking at open space that isn't currently developed and doesn't already have trees on it because milkweed doesn't like to grow under trees and butterflies don't like to go under trees. They don't like shade. Um, it's not surprising to find that the biggest opportunity areas are things that are already open space with a conservation mission, like a forest preserve, um, rights of way, roadways, utilities. That's a lot of land when you add it up. And then the big one with the circle around it, the arrow pointing to it, is residential yards. Residential landscapes, HOAs, those are a huge opportunity to add habitat, to add pollinator habitat to the landscape. The largest irrigated crop in the United States that we don't eat or use in any way is turf grass. And we could maybe do something better there. So we published that work talking about, there with math, there's a way to say that we could get to almost a third of that 1.3 billion stems with just urban landscapes. What does that look like? And how did we do that? We basically picked random places in the 7-county area and drove. The green line is us driving. The circles are what we looked at. The purple is what we couldn't see. And what you might notice about what we couldn't see is that it's people's backyards. Because we're not allowed to roam through people's backyards. That would be a crime. And that creates a big hole in the data. We didn't know what was going on in people's backyards. This is often a problem in research, is that you can't look into those areas, which led us to, well, maybe we should do a community science project because people can look in their own backyards and tell us what's there. Sometimes they had their cats tell us, which is my favorite photo from 4 years of that project, is this cat who would monitor monarch butterflies for us. And my friend Angie is super excited. I'm still using this photo of her bum in PowerPoint presentations. So we had 428 sites over about 4 years, including some awesome years when no one was allowed to leave their home, and so they could stay home and send us data. We got photos of all different kinds of gardens that we could never have quantified using data before, like this one from like between a sidewalk and a fence that's just like this tiny little strip. People were cramming habitat into all different kinds of spaces. I didn't include, we got a lot of them that are like the area between the garage and the alleyway. Lots of people putting habitat there, which you think of as just like no one's using that. There's lots of alley milkweed that's really providing habitat for monarch butterflies, but also parkways, beautiful gardens, which are the ones I included in the slide, not beautiful gardens, which are ones I didn't include in the slides. Um, and so to kind of end on what we got from that research. So we published a paper. I didn't include a picture of the paper, but we published a paper about what we learned about those gardens and how they were successful for monarch butterflies. And the most successful gardens actually all had common milkweed. There are other species of milkweed, and often we encourage people to plant the other species because they're thought of as more beautiful. These were the gardens that people chose to plant. We actually gave them some milkweed, none of which was common milkweed, but the gardens that people chose to plant and maintain that had the most monarch eggs all had common milkweed. It doesn't mean that you can't be successful without it, but the ones that people chose to have were. They mostly had a diverse array of blooming flowers, not just milkweed. They had other flowers blooming at different points throughout the season, and we think that actually probably is important for attracting monarch butterflies. Again, it doesn't mean you can't be successful without them, but it did correlate with success. And gardens that were older, specifically actually older than 5 years, did better. Now, the only way to have a 5-year-old garden is to have a 1-year-old garden. So you have to start somewhere, and the best day to start is 5 years ago. But if you don't start then, start now. It does take a little bit of time, and some people didn't see eggs in their first year. And we were happy to see that people were, by and large, recruiting monarch eggs. We didn't produce data from the caterpillar data because it is important to note that most eggs don't become caterpillars. That's true in the wild. Um, and the best garden, this is what I say in every talk. The best garden that you can create, the best garden you can have is the one that you can have, the one that fits. So I want to I think we're taking questions at the end, but I've spent a lot of time thinking about gardens in all different kinds of landscapes. I'm always happy to answer questions about that. I also think we have a couple of group poll questions, um, some of which I created that reflect things that people ask us all the time, both about rules around gardening in different municipalities, around weed rules, weed ordinances, and around mosquito spraying. So those were, I think, great polls to share.
Um, Thank you, Astor. And we did want to have a little dialogue, so we can take some questions and just to spark that discussion now, we do have a couple of polls. So Tori, if you want to launch any of the ones related to practices, like the weed ordinance, I think, weed ordinance and mosquito control. There we go. So you should have a poll that popped up on your screen, and you have a second to just click on it. So if you can't see it, the question is, does your community enforce a weed ordinance that restricts native gardens? And if you can't, for some reason, operate that, just go ahead and answer that in the chat. So Esther, while we're waiting for the serious questions, my question in the chat was, does the cat report data in your citizen science project?
The cat's family did.
That's pretty awesome. I'll have to get my dog on the project.
And somebody asked if the community science project is still going. It is not currently collecting data. We had to stop in order to write the paper, which I put in the chat. We are developing a different project more broadly on pollinators that we are piloting this summer near Steelworkers Park on the southeast side of Chicago. And then more broadly, maybe after that, depending on how it goes.
Excellent, thank you. So, Tori, did we have results from that first poll?
Yes. Would you like me to pull those up?
Sure. Oh, I guess I can click on it too. So we have 18 communities that do not enforce a weed ordinance, 34 that are not sure, and then just 14% have a weed ordinance. So if you want to chat about that, or we'll see if we have time for discussion, interested to see how the weed ordinance restricting native gardens is going. Or Astor, if it's helpful, you want to ask questions to those
Oh,
folks?
well, I guess I will just say like we've certainly have encountered this question a lot from residents who aren't sure if they're allowed to plant something like milkweed or what they should do if they want to plant a pollinator garden and how best to approach that.
We have a question about mosquito control right now. Should be up in your screen. And the question is just who handles mosquito control in your community? We actually weren't sure. So some were saying municipalities, some counties, and then we have quite a few right now answering that it's a mosquito abatement district. And some who don't know. And Astor, do you want to talk a little bit about why mosquito control is an issue?
Yeah, so this is another question we get both from residents and we've run into. So the pesticides can't tell the difference between monarch butterflies and mosquitoes. They're both insects. And so the when you're using a larvicide that just something that kills mosquito larvae, those typically go in storm drains. Those don't impact monarchs, but the kind of aerial spraying does. Um, when it's sprayed sort of at dusk, when adult monarchs aren't flying around, that's perhaps the lowest impact. It does kill monarch in their caterpillar stage if it kind of falls down on the milkweed. But also, mosquitoes carry a lot of diseases that can harm people, so we do want to be careful. It is always a trade-off situation. But it is something there is data to show that mosquito aerial spraying can impact monarchs. And probably when people are hiring like a Mosquito Joe to come out and spray their yard, it's probably the highest impact. And none of us have a lot of control over that.
So that's kind of the last of the polls on mosquito abatement. So we've got, yeah, there's some municipalities are actually doing it. Do you have any recommendations for municipalities can do just to?
So there's something called like an ultra low volume. So it uses really small droplets and it targets the mosquitoes in the air. And doing that at dusk, because butterflies, again, they don't like the dark. They're very afraid of the dark. They don't like shadows. They don't like dark. You're less likely to then target a butterfly, and you're most likely to target mosquitoes because we all know that's when they come out. And so those are very effective. Well, let me say this: those are less effective at hurting monarch butterflies, and I don't know a lot about mosquito control, and I shouldn't speak to that. Um, but those, from what I have read, are the best practices. We did get a question about planting milkweed, and I wanted to say it can feel weird to think about planting or planting a milkweed garden on a day that a lot of schools are closed because it's too cold. But one thing that we've run into both planning for large gardens and just from individuals is native plants aren't as easy to get as you would think. There's you there's just not as much supply as anyone would like, and so often ordering is for native plant supplies happens in like February. And so if you are thinking about a garden, doing some planning ahead in the winter, uh, especially if you're ordering more than a handful of plants. But even then, if you're ordering a handful of plants, sometimes it's most cost effective to order in the winter or early spring is a really great idea. Sometimes when it's like June, and we're planning for a garden, it can be almost too late to get those plants. There are a lot of great suppliers here in the greater Chicago area, more so than other places, but there's still not that many of them. And so you do want to plant in June, May, by July, by late June, it can be hot and it's hard for those plants to establish before the real heat of the day. And then you do have to really water them to get them through that hot part of the year, and it's more work. Planting them in the spring when it's already going to be wet, it's easier on you, it's easier on them, more your plants are going to survive.
Thank you, Esther, and thank you everyone for the questions and comments there. Let's move on now to the topic of the Endangered Species Act protection. It's not every day that we in local governments, particularly in the urban environment here, get involved in endangered species policy, but here's our chance. And the monarch is our species. So we have with us Sean Sertan, who's a fish and wildlife biologist for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in the Chicago field office. He has been with the agency for 25 years. And as a senior biologist, he reviews actions by other federal agencies to ensure protection for federally listed species, migratory birds, and other wildlife resources and their habitats. In addition, in his free time, Sean is an assistant varsity coach for a Lane Tech girls flag football team who won the state championship in 2023. So I don't know the name of the team, but go team. So, and go team for Team Monarch here. So, Sean, if you would tell us about the policy that is being proposed and how we can get involved.
Thanks, Edith. I will start I'll start off with a bit of history about the monarch. In 2014, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service received a petition from the Center for Biological Diversity, the Center for Food Safety, the Xerces Society, and one individual to list the monarch as a threatened species under the Endangered Species Act. In 2016, the service initiated development of a species status assessment, or SSA, for the monarch butterfly. An SSA is a compilation of the best scientific information to evaluate the current and future condition of a species. This assessment was used to support a finding in 2020 that monarch, warranted listing under the Endangered Species Act, but listing at the time was precluded by higher priority actions. The species was put on the candidate list and added to the service's work plan. We were then sued to complete an updated finding on the monarch in 2024. Today, the announcement that was made for the proposed rule to list the monarch as threatened is the finding we submitted to the Federal Register on December 4th, 2024, fulfilling the court order. The proposed rule will be published in the Federal Register on December 12th, 2024. As part of the listing process, all species go through a legal rulemaking process to be added to the federal list of threatened and endangered species. For monarch, this process started in 2014 when we received a petition to list the species as threatened. There is a difference between endangered and threatened species. Endangered species are defined under the Endangered Species Act as being in danger of extinction throughout all or a significant portion of their range. Threatened species are likely to become endangered in the foreseeable future throughout all or a significant portion of their range. For each species, a species status assessment is completed and then will be proposed for listing as either threatened or endangered if warranted. A species does not receive full legal protection under the Endangered Species Act until a final rule is published in the Federal Register. Monarch was proposed for listing as a threatened species on December 12, 2024. A final listing for monarch won't occur until we go through public review and comment on a proposal, address all public comment, and make a final decision if the species warrants listing. We are proposing to list the monarch as threatened. We completed a species status assessment, which is a rigorous assessment of the best available science information on the factors influencing the species' abundance and distribution, as well as the species' current and projected future condition. After the SSA was drafted, it went through a peer review process and was then completed. The primary influences on monarch were found to be the availability of milkweed and nectar sources, including both the losses and gains from conservation efforts, the loss and degradation of overwintering habitat in both Mexico and California, impacts from exposure to insecticides, and the effects of climate change. Monarchs in North America have a high probability of extinction in 60 years, with 56 to 74% in the eastern population and 99% in the western population. Therefore, we determined that the monarch butterfly meets the Endangered Species Act's definition of a threatened species. Next, I'll discuss what a 4D rule is. When we list a species as endangered, it automatically receives all the protections of Section 9 of the Endangered Species Act, meaning take of an endangered species is prohibited. We have more flexibility with threatened species. Under Section 4D of the Act, we can tailor the protective regulations to the species' needs where appropriate. This provides us flexibility to regulate activities that will impact a threatened species and allow take from other activities that support conservation. Now I'm going to talk about how the proposed 4D rule applies to the monarch. As I said, when we list a species as threatened, we can determine which prohibitions to include. For monarch, we started by saying that all take prohibitions were applied and then identified exceptions to these prohibitions. These exceptions are activities we are allowing, which may result in take of the species that we believe are important to the conservation of the species or are considered inconsequential to overall monarch conservation. Through these exceptions, we hope to achieve a significant increase in the availability of milkweed and nectar plants, protect and enhance overwintering habitat, and aid the public in helping further monarch butterfly conservation. Now I'm going to go through the specifics of what the 4D rule exceptions are, including exceptions for actions that may result in incidental take. The first exception includes activities that may maintain, enhance, remove, or establish milkweed and nectar plants within the breeding and migratory range that do not result in permanent conversion of native or naturalized grassland, shrubland, or forested habitats. Those specific activities are spelled out in the rule and include habitat restoration and management activities that sustain grassland, shrubland, or forested land with monarch habitat, livestock grazing and routine ranching activities, routine agricultural activities on lands already in production, such as plowing, drilling, disking, and mowing. This includes activities that support these agricultural activities. Fire management actions such as prescribed burns and hazardous fuel reduction activities. Silviculture practices and forest management activities that use state-approved best management practices. Maintenance, enhancement, removal, and establishment of milkweed and nectar plants on residential properties. Vegetation management activities when monarchs are not present. Our intent is to encourage landowners to aid and maintain habitat in order to achieve a significant increase in native milkweed and nectar plants, such that localized removal will be outweighed by the overall addition of milkweed and nectar plants across the landscape. There are additional exceptions, including take from activities covered under a comprehensive conservation plan for monarch developed by states and conservation programs developed by federal agencies under Section 7A1 of the Endangered Species Act. Also, take resulting from maintenance or improvement of monarch overwintering habitat in California, consistent with a site-specific Fish and Wildlife Service approved plan. Take from mortality from vehicle strikes will also be accepted. Each time we publish a proposed rule, we open a public comment period to receive feedback from the public, and we ask for information on particular topics that are detailed in the proposed rule document. For the monarch, we are asking for input on standard questions related to biology, range, population trends, etc. We are also seeking feedback on all the 4D rule exceptions that are included in the proposed rule. I want to note that the proposed 4D rule does not address pesticides. Instead, we are seeking public comment on this very complex issue. We encourage comments on what types of pesticides, which pesticide uses, and which pesticide application methods to accept. Another key question is how best to align any pesticide measures in a Monarch 4D rule with EPA's work. We are also asking for feedback on the proposed critical habitat designation. The public can participate and provide comments on the proposed rule during the 90-day comment period, which runs from December 12, 2024 through March 12, 2025. Comments can be submitted either electronically or by mail, and you can find more information on how to submit comments in the address addresses section of the proposed rule document, which is available on our website. We previously held 2 virtual public hearings. The first one was on January 14th of 2025, and the second one was on January 15th of 2025. And lastly, I will go through the next steps in the listing process. On December 12th, the proposed rule was published in the Federal Register. As we indicated on our last slide, December 12th also started a 90-day comment period, which runs through March 12, 2025. Regulations.gov has lots of good supporting documents, peer-reviewed comments, econ analysis, and can be found at the link on the slide. After we have considered the public comment and incorporated any new information to the rule, by statute, a final listing decision is due 1 year after the proposal. Please note, as we go through the listing process, the Monarch would not be regulated until February 2026 at the earliest, and only then if the Monarch is listed as threatened. Additional information and supporting documents can be found on the website listed on the slide. Thank you for joining us for this presentation, and I will stop sharing my screen and answer any questions that I'm able to.
Does anyone have any questions for Sean? And I would ask any of our speakers just to put that incidental take in the context of a suburban or urban environment in context. So if anyone want to tell me, what does that look like in daily practice? We've got quite a few Monarch mayors on the call. We've got a lot of activists here who probably are in the business of taking care of some butterfly gardens. So what are we talking about? Pulling out a couple of plants to clear a walkway is not an incidental take, provided that you're creating more habitat.
I can speak to that. Dan Salas from UIC and the Sustainable Landscapes Program. And Sean, thanks for sharing that. It's a good summary of kind of what the listing proposal is. Broadly within the Endangered Species Act, right? Incidental take is anything that can harm or kill or kind of otherwise disturb an endangered species. So obviously that can be a lot of different things. And I think what Sean was referring to with this, in regulatory speak, the 4D exemptions, right, is essentially that the service recognizes that because monarchs are so widespread and because conservation is so needed for them, they don't want to regulate, essentially like take that results from things like, yes, removing milkweed from a sidewalk or, you might disturb a monarch while you're maintaining your garden. And so those things are all broadly allowed, right? They're exempted from those restrictions that would naturally come with the Endangered Species Act. So, it gets pretty weedy, pun intended there, when you start talking about, monarchs and take. But, broadly speaking, trying to hit that balance of, yes, we need all this conservation work, that Aster spoke about, and I'll share a little bit here shortly, while also making sure that, on the broad scale, the service is able to, offer the protections that the monarch needs.
And just thanks, Dan. And to add to that, the best way to think of incidental take is, and that's primarily what I deal with, and this species is not listed yet, so I deal with the Endangered Species Act all the time. But the best way to think about incidental take is it's not, there's 2 different types of take. One is incidental and the other one is purposeful. And if it's not being done on purpose, if it's not purposeful, then those are actions that could occur where you're not intentionally trying to kill, harm, disturb. The take definition under the ESA is very long. You're not trying to purposely do those things. So that's why it's called incidental take. It's incidental to whatever the activities you are doing, whether it be a municipality, a federal agency that, those are the projects that I review. It's done incidentally and not on purpose.
Thank you. And we have a poll. We want to cue that up just to see who might comment. But again, to any of their speakers, Sean or Dan or Astor, what would be the value of having local governments make comment on this rule?
I can speak to that, Edith, but from my conversations, so we do a lot of collaboration with Fish and Wildlife Service, and in discussing with them, and Sean alluded to this too, there's portions of the listing proposal that the service is really looking for the public's input on, both in what's currently proposed and also what else should be included. And so this is the chance in the process to, share your insights, express your concerns, make recommendations. I would say the more specific recommendations you can make in terms of, I think, this should be included or this should be allowed or not allowed are the types of things that the service is looking for based on my conversations.
Thank you.
Yeah, I could just add, I mean, that's my understanding as well. Like, one of the goals here is that the monarch habitat needs to be created. That is the clear understanding of why monarchs are in decline. And so there is not a desire to have listing make it harder for the maintenance and care of habitat. And because monarchs are so widespread, habitat has to be in and amongst the places where everyone is living and working and being. And so nobody can think of all the ways that might impact folks. Somebody asked a specific question about that. Can you address how some people bring monarchs into their homes to raise them and how that might be impacted by listing? And that's a question we get a lot. Currently, the rule says that you can rear up to 250 monarchs, and I don't know many people who are hand rearing more than 250. There's a general consensus that hand rearing monarchs is super fun and educational and a great way to engage people in the process. Overall, that it's best for the population that we try to have monarchs raised in natural habitat outdoors, and that if you are rearing them, as much as we can have them be exposed to actually the patterns of the sun helps them understand migrating, but that raising some monarchs, especially so that people can see that process, is really a good way to bring new folks into the conservation fold. And that 250 number is something that a lot of folks have chosen to comment on, whether it's the right number.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sean, and to Dan and Astor for hopping in on the questions or answers. Appreciate that. So keep moving. We're on track here, but now we get to move to the more positive, I wouldn't say more positive part of the program, but just look at some of the conservation programs that are in place already. And there's a rich diversity of conservation programs that address urban and suburban landscapes, right-of-ways, which is really important here, and then agricultural lands. So you've already met Dan, who's been chiming up for us, but he is the Director of Sustainable Landscape Programs at UIC's Energy Resources Center. I did a pause when I first saw that the Energy Resources Center was managing monarchs, but they've done an amazing job for a really long time now. So before joining University of Illinois, Dan spent 18 years as an ecologist in the private sector. So Dan, if you want to tell us about monarch conservation programs.
Yeah, great. Yeah, and thanks for having me. And yeah, Energy Resource Center is an interesting place to be focused on conservation. Normally, it's thinking about energy efficiency and community and commercial planning, but monarchs are something like Astor alluded to earlier. Monarchs are something that touches everybody and everything, and energy infrastructure is part of that, right? I mean, everything from the fact that we use monarchs for education, for research, but also for things like, obviously restrictions through an Endangered Species Act could affect, how we manage infrastructure. And so it was from that actually motivated a lot of interest in monarch conservation through our program and some of the work that I'll be sharing here. And like we've talked a little bit, right? Monarchs like to think of them also as an ambassador for other species, right? There's other pollinators, insects, other wildlife that can benefit from all the same things that we do for monarchs. And so as we think about what to do about them and where to go with it, it's good to keep that in mind, because a lot of times people say, well, why would we do this for one species? But really, that species is an indicator of all the other things that can benefit from monarchs, both from wildlife, but also I'd say from a community standpoint. There's a lot of benefits to having this green space in place. And because it's a big problem and because it requires this landscape effort, there's a lot of collaboration involved, which is some of the things I'm going to speak to and some of the efforts that you or your community might be interested in getting involved with. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but again, the causes of decline are really, a combination of a lot of things. But the three big ones are climate change, the fact that land use has changed and resulted in habitat loss, and then pesticide use. So we've talked about that quite a bit already. The big thing I want to kind of convey as we think about taking action, though, is that anything you can do to create and sustain habitat for monarchs, again, with milkweeds and flowering plants, is really important. And then anything you can do to reduce the use of pesticides, but I would say more specifically insecticides and herbicides, right? So pesticides that target insects or plants that would be providing some of that milkweed or flowering, diverse flowering plants for nectar sources. And so a little bit more where I come from, and like I mentioned at the beginning, the Energy Resources Center, our program there facilitates something called the Rights of Ways Habitat Working Group. We like big, long names for some reason, but this whole group is focused on convening together partners from across different sectors and industries to think about conservation around infrastructure. And just like you as mayors and with working with communities, how do you do a sustainable community? How do you bring together both the community needs of infrastructure as well as the needs of nature? Going back to that paper that Astor mentioned, right? These things can work together and tend to work better if we focus on those together. And so we're really focused on expanding habitat, but also removing barriers that can stand in the way of actually doing some of that good work. When we think about this from a rights of way and a corridor standpoint, it's clear how that can have a big impact, right? There's millions of miles of corridors across the U.S., many just in the Chicago area itself. But when we look across the country, there's a huge opportunity here to both support things like monarchs and improve communities. So thinking about how this all kind of contributes to our green infrastructure, right? We tend to think of the built environment as infrastructure, and that integration of the built environment as well as the natural environment is really what we try to encourage and promote with the work that we do. And so you can see some examples here of how that looks along roadsides, within solar arrays, within community gardens, within other rights of ways. This is an aspect of sustainability that has been increasing in attention as of late with the global calls for addressing biodiversity loss. And so again, it's with this intersection of conservation and infrastructure and also the engagement, speaking to, again, that's what Astor you mentioned in terms of, kind of what makes a successful garden is what makes a successful landscape, right? Can it be maintained? Can it be done with engagement with the members that are helping support that in a way that sustains it in the long term? And so we have a few different projects and efforts underway that we thought would be of interest to share here. So I'll talk a little bit more about each of these here as we get into it. So first, I'm going to start off with the Illinois Monarch Project that some of you likely are familiar with. And Astor mentioned this goal of 1.3 billion stems of milkweed that are needed to stabilize the monarch population. Well, a few years ago, Illinois and other states took that 1.3 billion target and did an exercise of figuring out, okay, well, how much milkweed do we need across each state, especially in the upper Midwest, where again, we're sort of the hub of where monarchs migrate to from Mexico each year. And so what happens kind of in our neighborhood is what happens to the population in a large way. And so for Illinois, the goal of the Illinois Monarch strategy and the action plan was to create 150 million stems of milkweed to contribute to that 1.3 billion goal. Of course, if we can get more, that would be great. But even just getting to 150 is the target, and that's an ambitious target at that. And so the Illinois Monarch Project was developed around that time several years ago to really, publish this action plan. So it brought together people to think about the actions that are needed for monarchs, to provide connections to resources, also to engage in making pledges to commit to conservation, both at an individual level as well as through the Mayor's Monarch Pledge. And so it's a good resource hub for that. Specifically for municipalities, there's a page on the Illinois Monarch Project website that contains links to resources. So you can find fact sheets and information on, how to go about planting, how to create gardens, how to engage volunteers in doing this type of work. Some of those guidelines and recommendations can be really helpful to you or to others in your community that might be interested in monarchs. And then also it does link you to the Mayor's Monarch Pledge, which is something that's administered through the National Wildlife Federation, as well as the Monarch Way Stations program, which, again, building on these collaborations and connecting them all so people can engage across these programs to help monarchs out. So a lot of good resources there. That website's there. You can, again, as an individual, take the pledge to take action for monarchs. You can also link to the Mayor's Monarch Pledge. So many of your communities, maybe many of you already have. We'll hear a little bit more from Mayor Nelson later about their work there. And I think that's a great way to show that commitment and to encourage action among your community. One interesting, unique aspect to the Illinois Monarch Project is, kind of fostering interest and collaboration with the Route 66 Monarch Highway. So the fact that we have the historic Route 66 right through our state, it also broadly follows that migration pathway of monarch butterflies in the state. And so using that as an opportunity to engage communities and to build connections, this is a great way to do that. And so if you go on the website, I can put that link in the chat for this if you're interested. You can connect with this program as well if that is something that is actually I can't chat that at the moment. Sorry. Something that you're interested in connecting with. There is that QR code there if you'd like to use that. You can get to that website as well. But there are some upcoming meetings and activities, and it's a good forum to kind of share what's happening along that project and that effort. All right, next is a program that is, I would say, more Chicago-centric. This is something that we've been facilitating through our group at UIC. We do this a lot in collaboration also with Chicago Wilderness, if you're familiar with and working with Chicago Wilderness. But really this is focused on, again, how do we bring this infrastructure and nature enhancement together? And what's the framework to do that? So several years ago, we created this strategic roadmap on how to build that, including this collaboration with Field Museum to create a sort of right-of-way centric approach to thinking about how do we do conservation in and around Chicago. So we had a number of different partners from conservation organizations, communities, energy companies, the DOT, different entities helping with that. And with that, we identified priorities. Many of those have also started and continue to implement projects to help expand and restore green space. And so as we look at that, we have this prioritization framework where we sort of set these priorities. And again, you can access this through that QR code there if you're interested. This is better to view on a desktop version. You can also find this via our website. But we overlayered different priorities for biodiversity. We looked at the social vulnerability index, as well as then habitat connectivity between large sort of protected area hubs. And layering those, we came up with priorities along rights of ways. So roadsides, pipelines, power lines, those types of lands across Chicago to identify where we might want to focus conservation efforts in the future. And so with that, we have a number of partners who have already been undertaking efforts on their own, and this has helped kind of build coordination and collaboration. Others have used this to help kind of spur new project ideas. And so depending on where you are at in Chicagoland, you might have projects occurring around you. Maybe as a community, you have an interest in greening areas of rights of ways or green space that could benefit monarchs and other species ecosystem services. And so this is really led through this Growing Chicago Habitat Network to collaborate for on-the-ground action, based on partner interests, based on, where communities, want to engage around these types of topics, building on where there's priorities from existing plans or goals, and then of course, where there's funding available as well. So this network, we do meet twice a year, kind of moves around different places across the Chicago region. And really we're focused on connecting partners together to foster collaborations around either pursuing funding or project partnerships. And in the end, really focusing on conservation. How do we actually create habitat on the ground? How do we implement projects? And how do we encourage sustainability across communities through nature? One thing we're excited about to kind of illustrate this is just this past fall, we worked together with a number of different communities and partners to put in an application for the EPA Community Change Grant Program. We collaborated, put together a $50 million application to create nature-based solutions and community green space enhancements, as well as some energy efficiency improvements, again at the ERC, to kind of, help improve energy efficiency and nature access throughout Chicagoland. And so this is something we've submitted. We're waiting to hear back on whether or not it will be awarded. But I just use this here to illustrate the power of kind of coming together with these regional collaborations and building those connections so that when opportunities like this come along, you can actually engage and pursue funding for things like that. So if you would like to engage with the Growing Chicago Habitat Network, like I said, we have meetings, at least twice a year. Our next one likely won't be until June. So we have a little bit of time. But if you, again, go to this QR code, or if you go to Rights of Ways Habitat Working Group, you can go to our website. I'll have a link here at the end as well. You can register to receive updates. You can check out some of the work that's been done to date, including that prioritization map, and get connected that way. All right, now I want to speak a little bit to, we have the Monarch CCAA, which is a program that is something that we've been working on for some time within our program. This has really been recognized nationwide as a new program for kind of focusing conservation. It's a new model whereby we're engaging voluntary conservation and getting assurances for regulations, again, to help businesses kind of prepare for potential listing, as well as encouraging conservation. So this program itself, focuses on creating habitat, avoiding actions that will result in monarch take, targeting efforts for mowing and herbicide use so that we're maintaining habitat, then managing acres to sustain that habitat, and then setting aside areas so that they can be sustained as habitat over the long term. So this program has had really nationwide engagement from Delaware all the way to California. As you can see, kind of illustrated on this map, each of those states that are orange are ones that have Monarch CCAA partners. CCA, I kind of had on a slide earlier, is a candidate conservation agreement with assurances. Again, very regulatory speak, but it's a national monarch conservation agreement focused on, again, doing conservation around infrastructure. And so with nearly 70 partners across the country, we have now conserved over 1.1 million acres of monarch habitat, which makes it one of the largest, or the largest voluntary conservation agreement in existence. And part of that is we have a good core of partners here around the Chicagoland area. So, within Illinois, we have ComEd and Illinois DOT, both taking actions to help support monarchs through this program. And then we also, on the Indiana, over the border, we have NiSource and Indiana DOT, amongst other partners, undertaking conservation actions as well. So those are all part of those contributions that feed up into that 1.1 million acres. And what we hear a lot from partners is, they can't do that themselves, right? They also have to do this in collaboration to make it successful. And so, one thing I hear from partners that I want to share with you is, partnering with municipalities and having engagement with the communities where these corridors move through is really, really important. And so collaborating on projects where those are identified, supporting the vegetation management they're doing that helps sustain habitat is really important. And then where there's successes, share those success stories across the community and across those networks. Just, I guess, as an example here too, I have those photos. This is from Prospect Heights, where ComEd is doing a lot of collaboration on right-of-way prairies. And again, that contributes into this program. It also contributes into Growing Chicago. So all these efforts really tie together to strengthen this kind of engagement. So as we kind of close this out, what can you do to help support pollinators and of course monarchs? There are programs that help demonstrate your commitment through things like Bee City, or of course for monarchs, the Mayor's Monarch Pledge, which again, many of you might already be engaging with, or maybe you've looked at that, or maybe your predecessors have looked at that, but that is a really great way to demonstrate those commitments and take action. Certainly there's other resources that are out there that help, again, with that on the ground work. I know Astra put in the, those field guides for different species to plant. That's really, really useful. I do want to echo, some thoughtful planning goes a long way in terms of making sure that a site can be planted at the right time, it can be maintained, that you have that support network in place to make it a success. I think, I know we had a question earlier about weed ordinances with that poll question. That is something we hear a lot from right-of-way partners, is making sure that local ordinances allow them to do their habitat work. So where you have those opportunities to engage with, like energy companies like ComEd or other pipelines or roadsides to encourage those types of habitat efforts, we do want to encourage that. Again, I think as a resource for your community members, this is where the Illinois Monarch Project can really be useful, that you can use that to provide lists of native plants or resource guides to help your community members in their own conservation efforts. And then to the extent that you have this locally, if there's any needs for, variances for ordinances or, anytime that there's incentives offered, that goes a long way toward also building engagement. I've seen some communities even have, small funding available to do pollinator gardens and things like that. I mean, if you can do things like that to help lower those barriers, again, that goes a long way. And to our discussion earlier on pesticides, anything you do to restrict or limit the use of pesticides, especially again, herbicides or insecticides, goes a long way for monarchs as well. So looking at those programs, and again, it comes down to being thoughtful. We need those tools for various reasons, but if we take a little bit more thoughtful approach to them, we can still use them wisely and still benefit monarchs. So there's a couple ways you can go about this then, as you think of this as a spectrum, right? If there's nothing else, one thing you can do is take some space that's barren and do a little work to plant it, right? Plant some milkweed, some flowering plants, and that simple action goes a long way to helping monarchs. If you want to spend a little more time and effort, you can scale it up. You can take the Mayor's Monarch Pledge, right? Show that commitment and communicate that with your community. Or you can take larger green spaces like this. Again, here we have a right-of-way that is in turf and just mowed. And that's a lot of time and effort and fuel and cost that is needed. And if you restore that into something like a prairie or a more natural green space, right, that can limit lessen the amount of maintenance that maybe is required. It changes up the type of maintenance that's needed, but also creates a lot of community benefits and beautification for a community. And then beyond that, diving into, thinking about the ordinances you have and how they either encourage or discourage things like wildlife habitat for pollinators or other species. And again, National Wildlife Federation has this great resource that helps you think about how to create wildlife-friendly property maintenance ordinances. That's a lot to speak through. But that is something to think about, is how do we encourage that as a community? So with that, I do invite you to connect with us with the Rights Ways Habitat Working Group. Again, through these different avenues, you can connect to any of these programs that I've shared here today. You can either contact me directly, or you can connect with us over LinkedIn, where we send out regular updates as well as through our website. There's a registration where you can get on our email list. We send out emails usually about once a quarter or so to on updates of various programs and initiatives, including Growing Chicago. So with that, if we have time, happy to take some questions.
Thank you, Dan. We've got some terrific questions in the chat, but just in the interest of getting through time and giving Mayor Nelson time to speak, I would direct our speakers to answer those questions in the chat. Good question about seeds, seed mixes, about the trends for populations, and then also grants, which I'd love to hear the answer to. We have one quick question just on participation in some of these conservation programs. So Tori, if you want to cue that poll up yes, we'd like to know if your community currently participates in monarch conservation programs, like the Mayor's Monarch Pledge or Monarch Watch. And spoiler alert, I counted 10 monarch mayors and municipalities represented on the call. So shout out to Highland Park, Deerfield, Palos Heights, Winnetka, Rolling Meadows, Oak Park, Northbrook, Berwyn, Willowbrook, and Glenview for taking the pledge currently or in the past. But we've got Mayor Michelle Nelson, who's the mayor of the village of Flossmoor, as a member of the Mayor's Monarch Pledge Leadership Circle, who's very active in the program. And from for this elevated perch in the monarch conservation world, she can share what they're doing in Flossmoor. But she also has a very down-to-earth view. Fun fact there, Mayor Nelson is the shortest mayor in the state of Illinois. So I'm thrilled to have you here. Mayor Nelson was first elected as mayor of Flossmoor in 2021. Her term ends this year. In April, she served as commissioner of the Zoning Board of Appeals for 12 years before that. Mayor Nelson is a civil engineer and previously worked in the construction industry, also very much engaged in STEM programs and education locally. She's co-founder of Homewood Flossmoor Robotics and active with the Homewood Science Center, which is an amazing resource in the South Suburbs. So Mayor Nelson, tell us what you do in Flossmoor and why it matters.
Hi, thank you so much for the lovely introduction. My kids say that I'm getting shorter every day. So with that, just a little introduction into the village of Flossmoor for those of you who might not be familiar with us. We were established in 1924, so we just celebrated our 100-year anniversary. And with that 100-year anniversary, at all of our events throughout the year, we were giving away free milkweed plants, which was a lot of fun to do. Our population is just over 9,700 people. We are 28 miles due south of Chicago, and we have a Metro electric stop, which is one of the reasons that our village has been so successful throughout the years. And then also we're home of the famous, or we think it's famous, Flossmoor Station Restaurant and Brewery. We call them the OG of microbrews. It's a women-owned brewery. And one of my friends said to me when I was trying to figure out what native plants to use at my own house, that native plants are like microbrews. If you don't like the first one, just try another one. So anybody wants to come visit me in the village of Flossmoor and have a microbrew and talk about our program, our Green Commission and our program, please come on down. How we started. I got to give a shout out. We have Carrie Malfeo in here, and Carrie Malfeo is part of the group. She's listening today. She was really, she's a member of the Chicago Southland Green Commission, which is different than Flossmoor's Green Commission, but she was part of the original group that started all of this. She's an amazing person, and an amazing resource to have. So we started in 2013 as a subcommittee of the Community Relations Commission. The work that they were doing was so popular that in 2017, we spun them off and hosted our own separate Green Commission. We established that. So some of the early work that they were doing was starting a bag habit, encouraging folks to bring recycle or reusable bags to the grocery store with them to shop. Also, Recycle Palooza was a signature event where people cleaned out their homes. And also idling gets you nowhere. So some really great work there to get us going. We had tremendous growth thanks to several key people, and I'm going to touch more on them next, but community leadership, people like Carrie Malfeo, who's on the call, who are really pushing for expanded options like what you see here in the screen is a school garden. Also village staff who was supporting the work of volunteers, business support, people who were willing to donate money and resources to help us get going, to sponsor different events, and then also volunteers and grants. So I'm going to talk about volunteers and some of our other resources next. Volunteers, we think that everybody and anybody can get involved. We worked with a Special Recreation Association with folks who have special needs. They come out and plant with us regularly. Of course, neighbors get involved, organizations and clubs that are around town, churches. They're a great source of volunteers. Also, our youth baseball league, they like to pitch in, and our HF high school students, they volunteer throughout the village all year long, whether it's community engagement, whether it's Green Commission projects. Yesterday, they just helped with a day of service that we had in the village. They're an incredible resource for us from a volunteer's perspective. And then also sororities, Alpha Kappa Alpha, they come down from as far as Chicago to the village of Flossmoor to engage in plantings that we have locally. So big shout out to the AKAs. Partners, lots of partners help make this possible. Chicago Region Trees Initiative, they gave us a $30,000 grant a couple of years ago that allowed us to plant 300 trees in our parkways, native trees in our parkways. So that was a big boost to the village of Flossmoor. We planted 600 native trees throughout the village in the past 4 years. Also, Southland Green Commission, they help with our seed library, making sure that there's native plant seeds and specifically milkweed seeds that are available for anybody to have free. Hidden Gem Half Marathon, that's one of our signature events, but it draws 1,000 runners from around the world to run 13.1 miles throughout the village. And in every single packet that we had for runners, we placed a packet of milkweed seeds. So not only are we trying to make a difference here locally, we're trying to make a difference on an international scale. So hopefully people go home and plant those milkweed seeds. Also, the Homewood Flossmoor Park District is an amazing partner. They let us plan different native gardens in the parks. They're separate from us, so it is a partnership. It's not something that we oversee. And then also they have what's called Coyote Run. It is an amazing golf course that is full of native plantings and educational projects. Just last year, we planted an entire edge of the golf course with native plants. And when I say edge, gosh, it was 2 holes long, so several football fields long. So they're a great partner with us in the effort. And then also school districts 233 and 161, we've established gardens in the schools that they use for education. And then I got to give a shout out to Possibility Place Nursery. The head of our Green Commission actually is the owner of this nursery, and they provide a lot of native plants. And I heard somebody asking earlier if it's too early to order. It is not too early. They are taking orders. Sorry, shameless plug for a really great resource that we have here in the Southland. Actions. I mentioned earlier that we got a $30,000 grant for planting trees, planting parkway trees. And that was called Plant the Gem. That was a one-day project that drew over 300 volunteers from around the region. Also, we have spring and fall parkway plantings. Our trees now, we don't charge for them. We plant them as a budget line item for the village. We were noticing that when we were charging for parkway trees, people weren't signing up, but now that we have a budget line item for it, people are thrilled to have them, and we're really working hard to preserve that tree canopy. Butterfly native gardens in the neighborhoods, as we are redesigning public spaces. We're taking out all of the more ornamental stuff and replacing it with native gardens. And then also working with other groups. We had a Jack and Jill group who wanted to plant a native garden. So we were able to find this beautiful shady spot in the village, and they came out and helped us replant it and got a good education along the way on what the different plants were and why they were selected. So that was a lot of fun. We also, as I mentioned earlier, we do plant giveaways at all of our events. Those milkweed plants are very popular. They go very fast. Also, we have the seed library, thanks to the Chicago region Green Commission. Oh, and I just onto the Mayor's Monarch Pledge. Since 2021, we have been a member, and there are 3 levels of membership. The base level, which is really, our entry, you just have to agree to perform 3 of the over 30 actions that they have. And but quickly, what we were realizing was that their 30 actions, were really great. Was a really great outline for us to grow our sustainability and environmental activities. So quickly, those 3 actions that we were able to complete turned into, I think we've got like 16 or so now actions. But if you complete 8 actions, you become a member of the leadership circle. And if you complete 24 of the 30 actions, you become a champion. The different categories of action are communications and convening, program and demonstration gardens, and then systems change. I'll talk about the first 2. Systems change is something that we really haven't been able to tackle quite yet. One of the things on systems change is the no-mow movement, which I know there's some differing opinions on that. And Flossmoor just started allowing people to park trucks in their driveway in 2019. So when we talked about no-mow May, they weren't quite ready for that. So maybe we'll try it again someday. The actions under communication and convening that the village has tackled is an annual proclamation, which is a pretty easy thing to do, but also public milkweed and native nectar planting programs that we have throughout the warm weather season. Also engagement with garden leaders and partners, and that part has been really exciting. Different master gardeners have come out to help us with our projects. Also have education events that are available for the public, so that everybody can learn more about native gardening and what they can do at their own homes. Engagement with neighborhood groups to plant different native gardens, and then engaging with developer and other community leaders, and then also creating a community art project. Those are all different things that we have been successful with as part of the Mayor's Monarch Pledge. Under program and designation gardens, we hosted a native plant sale at one of our events that went very well. We also facilitate milkweed seed collection through the Chicago Southland Green Commission. We plant and maintain a pollinator-friendly demonstration garden. We're always adding to the list of different gardens that we are planting each year. And then, of course, planting the milkweed along roadsides and medians or public right-of-ways. We partner with Bloom Township for that. We are split into 2 townships. Bloom Township is the east part of the village, and along all of those roadsides, we are planting milkweed seeds. Also, outdoor education, that's super important. And I mentioned earlier about our work with Jack and Jill and also the schools. Community science through the HF Park District and also the Chicago Southland Green Commission. There's so many wonderful education events for residents. And then, of course, adding native milkweed and nectar producing plants to our local gardens and invasive species removal program. This we actually partnered with CN this fall, Canadian National Railway, and there was a patch through town that was just covered in invasive species. And they went in and cleared it all out for us. And it's really quite lovely now. And I can't wait to see what they bring back in their place. But they're working on that. And that's been another great partnership with us. And then also displaying educational signage at pollinator habitats. So those are all of the things that we've done to fulfill the Mayor's Monarch Pledge. And then, of course, Impact is Blooming. This is the group who worked with us to plant a shade garden in last fall. It not only is it great for the environment, it's great for the soul. People are coming together and forming friendships and making bonds, getting to know each other. So with all of our volunteers and all of the ways that people come out to support the village, they're also getting to know each other on a personal level. And that's one of the things that really helps strengthen our village. And with that, that's all I've got. Thank you though so much for having me.
Thank you, Mayor Nelson. What an inspiring presentation to close, and just so wonderful to see community engagement in Flossmoor for this really important cause, and then how it spreads. We are out of time, but I just wanted to shout out to Mayor Stratz of Palos Heights, who was one of the first mayors, the first mayor in the South Suburbs to join the Mayor's Monarch Pledge. And Amy Ingalls is here. I promised her a chance to just say hello at the end here. Any greeting you would like?
Oh, hi, everybody. Thanks a lot for giving me a quick opportunity. The mayor regrets he couldn't be here, but as you know, we're very dedicated to nature and sustainability. And I would just highlight Lake Catherine as an example where we offer, it's a nature center of botanical gardens established in about 2005. They have amazing programs, one of which is the pollinator gardening course. So we feel like, partnering with this group and other groups is just makes sense, and we'll continue to do it. We love adding to the capacity of the Monarch program and other nature and sustainability programs as well. So thanks for this program today, and look forward to working with you in the future.
Thank you. Thank you so much to our speakers. Shout out to the Southland for being active. Thank you to all the mayors throughout the Chicago region who are currently supporting the Mayor's Monarch Pledge. Another timely reason for having this topic now is the Mayor's Monarch Pledge. You can take that pledge until May 31st. That is in one of the links in the chat there, the resource guide for municipalities. Thank you, Mayor Reinbold, for asking about the grants. That was always my question, and I'm glad to see there are more resources available than I recall when we did this topic several years ago. We will, of course, put all of the slides on our website. The information with the links in there will be present as well, so you can follow up and share this this meeting content with other folks in your community or beyond who didn't get a chance to participate, or if you want to reference things. So again, thank you to Dan and Aster and Sean and Mayor Nelson for participating in the presentation today. And then I just want to call out the next meeting. We're going to be on a little spree of nature-related topics here for Environment Committee. We're speaking about dark skies next week, so or next month, which is Tuesday, February 18th. The usual will be an online meeting, topic dark skies. So please join us if you can. And then thank you so much for populating our questions. We had a hard time keeping up with it, and I was delighted to see we ran out of time. There's so much good stuff to share. So any other burning questions, please pop that in the chat and we'll get back to you, or feel free to follow up with an email. Thank you.